The girl was on a video call with her mother when suddenly someone began pounding on the front door. Sarah assumed it was just a package delivery, so without thinking twice, she opened the door. But the moment she did, a strange man forced his way inside and attacked her. Sarah's mother was still watching everything through the video call. She desperately screamed at the man to leave her daughter alone, but he ignored her. She immediately called the police, but by the time help arrived, the damage had already been done. For Sarah, that terrifying experience changed everything. Afterward, her mother decided they needed a fresh start. She took Sarah and moved away from the small town where the incident had happened. They settled into a new home, hoping that a change of surroundings would help Sarah recover and move on with her life. But Sarah couldn't simply forget what had happened. She became extremely nervous and constantly felt like someone was watching her. Even the smallest noise inside the house would send her into a panic. Whenever she heard something unusual, Sarah would grab the knife she kept beside her bed and run straight to her mother's room. She would tell her mother that someone had broken into the house. Her mother would search every room, check the doors and windows, and look around the entire house, but there was never anyone there. At first, her mother thought Sarah was simply struggling to cope with what she'd been through, and she believed that, with time, her daughter would slowly heal. But she was wrong, because Sarah had no idea that her constant fear would soon lead her straight into the middle of a terrifying murder mystery. Just a few days later, Sarah noticed something unusual happening next door. Her neighbor, Jack, had opened a small auto repair shop right beside his home. The problem was that his business was extremely noisy. The constant sound of engines and power tools was driving another neighbor, Mrs. Kim, crazy. She confronted Jack and gave him an ultimatum: either move the repair shop somewhere else, or she would call the police and report him. As they argued, Mrs. Kim's niece arrived. A short time later, another neighbor named John also showed up. With more people gathering around, Jack decided it was better to avoid an argument. He made a few excuses and went back inside his shop. But Sarah noticed something that the others seemed to miss. Mrs. Kim clearly didn't trust John. She warned him to stay away from her niece and made it clear that she didn't want him around. Then, still angry, she walked back into her house. At the time, Sarah didn't understand why Mrs. Kim was so suspicious of John. Sarah was stunned by what she was seeing. Then, suddenly, Jack stepped directly beneath the camera and stared straight at Sarah. The moment she saw him looking at her, Sarah became terrified. She realized that Jack might have figured out that she had been secretly taking pictures of him, so Sarah quickly got up and moved away from the window. She thought that would be the end of it, but one afternoon, Sarah was sitting outside alone, going through the pictures she had taken. Suddenly, the phone inside the house started ringing. Sarah reluctantly left her camera on the chair and rushed inside to answer it. "Hello? Hello?" She kept saying it over and over, but there was no response on the other end. After waiting for a while, Sarah finally hung up and went back outside, but the moment she stepped outside, she froze. Her camera was gone. Sarah looked around in panic, but there was no one in sight. Then she immediately thought of Jack and his auto repair shop across the street. She suspected that Jack had taken her camera, but she couldn't confront him because she had no proof. And as it turned out, Sarah's suspicion was correct. Jack had taken the camera because he wanted to find out why Sarah had been secretly photographing him. But the bigger question was, why was Jack so worried about Sarah spying on him? Night eventually fell. Sarah told her mother everything about the missing camera, but surprisingly, her mother didn't take it seriously. Since Sarah had become extremely anxious about even the smallest things lately, her mother assumed that Sarah had probably misplaced the camera and simply forgotten where she'd left it. The next morning, Mrs. Kim invited Sarah and her mother over for a meal. During their conversation, Sarah learned that Mrs. Kim had almost no family left. Her niece was the only close family member she still had. That was why Mrs. Kim desperately wanted her niece to stay close to her. Since the two girls were around the same age, the adults suggested that Mrs. Kim's niece take Sarah along on a community weekend camping trip. But after everything Sarah had been through, she didn't want to go anywhere. She preferred staying home quietly and taking pictures, so she immediately turned down the offer. Just then, the loud sound of an engine started coming from Jack's auto repair shop again. The noise was so irritating that Mrs. Kim immediately called the police. A few minutes later, the officers arrived and spoke with Jack, eventually calming the situation down. Sarah immediately told her mother to mention the missing camera to the police as well. Her mother still wasn't completely convinced by Sarah's story, but she told the officers everything anyway. However, when the police searched the house for the camera, they suddenly found it sitting on a table behind the house. Sarah's mother was extremely embarrassed. No matter how much Sarah tried to explain what had happened, her mother assumed that Sarah must have simply misplaced the camera and forgotten about it. So, as far as she was concerned, the matter was over. But the next morning, as soon as Sarah's mother left for work, Jack showed up at Sarah's house. He confronted her directly. He wanted to know why she had been secretly taking pictures of him. Sarah had nothing left to hide. Instead, she confronted Jack and asked him why he had stolen her camera. Jack simply replied, "Now that you know everything, we're even, so there's no need to tell anyone else about this." Sarah thought maybe the whole situation was finally over, but that night, she was sitting by her window as usual, taking pictures of whatever she could see outside. Then something caught her attention. Across the street, Sarah saw Mrs. Kim upstairs, gathering some clothes, but at the same time, on the first floor, she spotted a mysterious figure wearing a hoodie. The moment Sarah saw the shadow, she froze. She knew it couldn't be Laura, because Laura was away on the community camping trip. Something felt terribly wrong. Sarah immediately started recording with her camera and rushed toward Mrs. Kim's house. As soon as Mrs. Kim opened the door, Sarah told her that she had just seen a strange figure inside the house. Mrs. Kim was instantly frightened. The two women grabbed baseball bats and began searching the entire house. They checked every room and eventually made their way into the garage, but after searching for quite some time, they couldn't find anyone. Finally, Mrs. Kim assumed that the strange shadow Sarah had seen was probably just the result of a lamp near the staircase casting a shadow. Since there was no sign of an intruder, Sarah eventually went back home. But the moment Sarah left, a dark figure suddenly stepped out from a car parked in the basement, and what happened the next morning would leave everyone in shock. The following morning, Laura returned home from the camping trip. Sarah immediately went over to see her and followed her inside the house. Everything was completely silent. Sarah quietly went upstairs looking for Mrs. Kim, but the moment she reached the second floor, she saw something horrifying. She froze in shock. Sarah immediately called the police for help, but it was already too late. Mrs. Kim was dead. When the police began investigating the murder, Sarah told them everything that had happened the previous night. She also told them about the mysterious shadow she had seen inside the house. Sarah believed that the figure was probably the killer, but the police weren't convinced. According to them, Mrs. Kim was well liked throughout the neighborhood. She had no known enemies, and as far as they could tell, no one had an obvious reason to want her dead. But Sarah was certain of one thing: that shadow she saw the night before wasn't just a trick of the light. The police initially believed Mrs. Kim had probably slipped while taking a shower and hit her head on the bathroom sink, causing her death. But then something suddenly occurred to Sarah. Mrs. Kim had complained to the police several times about Jack's auto repair shop, so Sarah began to wonder, could Jack actually be the killer? Her suspicions seemed somewhat reasonable. Sarah told the police what she was thinking, but they had no solid evidence against Jack. They explained that for now, it was only a suspicion. They would have to wait for the autopsy report to determine what had really happened. Meanwhile, that night, Sarah's mother brought Laura back to their house. Mrs. Kim's death had completely shaken Laura. She was devastated. So, to keep Laura away from any more upsetting news, Sarah's mother strictly warned Sarah not to talk to anyone about Mrs. Kim's death again. But Sarah was furious. She decided that if the police weren't going to investigate properly, she would do it herself. Once again, her suspicion turned toward Jack. One night, Sarah saw Jack carrying a large bag as he got into his car and drove away. Something about it didn't feel right. So Sarah got into her own car and secretly followed him. After driving for a while, she saw Jack arrive at a bar where a party was taking place. Jack met up with a man Sarah didn't recognize. A few moments later, the two men quietly disappeared into a separate room. From a distance, Sarah watched as they talked for a while. Then the stranger took the bag from Jack. But suddenly, Jack noticed Sarah hiding in the corner. He was furious. He couldn't understand why Sarah kept taking pictures of him and following him everywhere. Trying to make light of the situation, Jack jokingly asked if Sarah had a crush on him, but Sarah didn't laugh. Instead, she confronted him directly. She asked if the bag contained Mrs. Kim's golden jewelry. To Sarah's surprise, Jack burst out laughing. He explained that the bag contained nothing but his own auto repair tools. His repair shop hadn't been doing well lately, so he had been forced to sell some of his tools just to cover his expenses. Sarah had no choice but to believe him. What she didn't realize was that after spending so much time around Jack, she had slowly started developing feelings for him, and Jack liked Sarah too, but he believed Sarah hated him. That's why he had never found the courage to tell her how he really felt. The next day, the police returned with the autopsy report, and the results revealed something shocking. Mrs. Kim hadn't died from hitting her head on the bathroom sink. The injuries on her body clearly showed that someone had attacked her from behind with a weapon. This wasn't an accident. Mrs. Kim had been deliberately murdered. Now the biggest question was, who had a motive to kill Mrs. Kim? During the investigation, the police became most suspicious of her niece, Laura. After all, Laura stood to inherit most of Mrs. Mrs. Kim's property and belongings, but the investigation also revealed that Laura had been out of town on a camping trip on the night of the murder. She simply couldn't have been there, so the police completely ruled Laura out as a suspect. Meanwhile, Sarah took out her camera and started going through all the pictures again and again. She kept asking herself, if Jack wasn't the killer, then who had murdered Mrs. Kim? That's when she noticed someone in one of the pictures, John. Sarah suddenly remembered that there had also been tension between Mrs. Kim and John. Something about it didn't feel right, so she grabbed her camera and went straight to Laura. Laura explained that John had been following her around for some time and that he had feelings for her, but Mrs. Kim strongly disapproved of their relationship. She didn't like John at all and had warned him several times to stay away from her niece. Sarah wanted to ask more questions, but suddenly Laura became angry. She complained that everyone kept suspecting her and that she was tired of being treated like a criminal. Then she angrily grabbed her belongings and stormed out of Sarah's house. Seeing Laura react that way made Sarah wonder if she had been suspicious for no reason. So she decided to stop investigating John. But then something strange happened. Sarah took a few more pictures with her camera, and in one of them, she spotted Laura and John together. Both were carrying backpacks and looked extremely nervous. It seemed like they were in a hurry to go somewhere. Sarah immediately became suspicious again. She got into her car and secretly followed them. After driving for a while, they reached a remote, rough mountain road. Then they disappeared into an isolated forest. Sarah followed them from a distance. Once they were deep inside the woods, Laura and John pulled out shovels and started digging into the ground. A few minutes later, they pulled a long object out of the dirt. Sarah was stunned. She was just about to take a picture when the two suddenly stopped and started heading back. Sarah quickly followed them, but accidentally made a noise. Luckily, Laura and John didn't see her. She was hiding behind a tree. As soon as Sarah got home, she told her mother everything about Laura and John and showed her the pictures. But after looking at them, her mother wasn't convinced. She told Sarah that the pictures didn't prove anything. Then she firmly warned Sarah to stay out of the investigation. That night, Sarah went to Jack's house. The two were supposed to go on their first date, but the moment they stepped outside, they found the police waiting right in front of the house. The police didn't say a word. They immediately began searching Jack's house. Jack and Sarah had no idea what was happening. After searching for quite some time, the officers found something shocking inside a bag, a metal pipe covered in blood. Sarah immediately told the police everything she had seen in the woods. She explained that Laura and John might have been working together to frame Jack for the murder, but the police already had physical evidence right in front of them, so they didn't believe Sarah. They assumed Sarah was in a relationship with Jack and was simply lying to protect him. Jack was arrested and taken to jail. Meanwhile, Sarah's mother became extremely worried about her daughter. She decided that Sarah needed to stay completely away from the investigation, so she locked Sarah inside her room and refused to let her leave the house. But Sarah wasn't about to give up. Her favorite guy, Jack, was sitting in jail for a crime he didn't commit, and she was determined to prove his innocence. The moment she got the chance, Sarah climbed out through the window and escaped. She then secretly made her way into John's house through a bathroom window. Sarah hid inside a closet. From there, she managed to record some crucial evidence with her camera, evidence that could potentially prove Jack was innocent. But then she discovered a shocking truth. Laura was the real mastermind behind the entire scheme. Laura had used John to help her get her hands on her aunt's property, but Laura didn't want to share the inheritance with anyone. She wanted everything for herself. So after killing Mrs. Kim, Laura also decided to eliminate John. She then tried to make it look like John had taken his own life because he was overwhelmed by guilt over the murder. Sarah secretly recorded the entire confession, but just as she was doing it, her camera's memory card became full. As Sarah reached for the memory card to replace it, Laura realized that Sarah now knew too much. She pulled out a gun and threatened Sarah. Then she forced her to get behind the wheel and drive. Their destination was the same remote forest where Sarah had previously seen Laura and John digging. Meanwhile, Sarah's mother went into her room to bring her some food, but she was shocked to discover that Sarah had escaped. Just as she was about to go outside and search for her, she noticed a car driving down the road. Sarah was behind the wheel, but she wasn't alone. The moment her mother saw the situation, she remembered everything Sarah had told her. She immediately realized that Sarah must have gone after the truth. Without wasting any time, she got into her own car and followed them. After driving for a while, Laura took Sarah back to the same isolated forest. She pointed her gun at Sarah and ordered her to destroy the camera. Sarah didn't argue. She picked up a shovel and started smashing the camera over and over again. But Laura had no idea. Sarah had already removed the memory card. Laura knew very little about cameras, so she never realized realized that the real evidence was safely stored on the memory card. Just as Laura was about to shoot Sarah, Sarah's mother suddenly arrived. She managed to shoot Laura, knocking her unconscious. Afterward, Sarah and her mother handed all the evidence over to the police. This time, the police had more than enough evidence and witnesses against Laura. The truth finally came out. Laura was responsible for 2 murders, and there was nowhere left for her to hide. Meanwhile, Jack was released from jail after the evidence proved that he was innocent. And with that, the story comes to an end.